The Mediterranean Sea sits atop a geological time bomb that most people never think about, the violent collision between Africa and Europe, grinding together at 2 centimeters per year for millions of years. That collision creates pressure, unimaginable amounts of it, stored in fault lines and magma chambers from Turkey to Spain. On May 14th, 2025, some of that pressure found release when a magnitude 6.4 earthquake cracked the seafloor near Crete. But instead of ending there, the pressure simply transferred to the next weak point in the system. 18 days later, Mount Etna became that weak point, exploding with pyroclastic flows that could have killed thousands if they had reached populated areas. Scientists studying the sequence discovered that the Mediterranean operates like a single massive pressure vessel, where releasing stress in one location immediately increases it somewhere else. The earthquake near Crete didn't just shake buildings, it squeezed Sicily's magma chambers like a geological vice until something had to give. And it's still happening. Seismic networks detect pressure waves traveling between fault systems in real time, creating a domino effect where each geological event makes the next one more likely. Vesuvius shows increased deep tremors. Santorini's underwater vents release unusual gases. Even fault lines in Turkey register stress changes that correlate perfectly with volcanic activity in Italy. The entire Mediterranean basin is under pressure that's been building for geological ages, and the release mechanisms are starting to synchronize. When continents collide for millions of years, and the pressure finally finds coordinated release points across multiple countries, can anything stop the cascade once it begins? Mount Etna towers over Sicily as a 3,400 meters tall monument to the raw power of continental collision. Unlike typical volcanoes born directly from subducting tectonic plates, Etna sits at the crossroads of multiple geological fault lines, positioning it to absorb seismic stress from across the Mediterranean basin. The volcano's very existence is a testament to the slow-motion collision between Africa and Europe that has reshaped this region for over 50 million years. The African plate grinds northward at a seemingly glacial pace of just 2 centimeters per year, but the cumulative effects are staggering. That relentless pressure has progressively closed the Mediterranean, transforming it from an open ocean to a nearly landlocked sea. In the process, it has created one of the most geologically complex regions on Earth, a spiderweb of interconnected fault systems that feed directly into Etna's magmatic plumbing. Dr. Marco Ferretto Carlino of Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology explains Etna's unique position. He says the volcano sits on an active fault between the African plate and the Ionian microplate. Both are being forcefully shoved beneath the Eurasian plate, creating what we call a slab window that allows magma direct access to the surface. It is like a pressure release valve for the entire Mediterranean. But pressure release valves have limits. 8,000 years ago, Etna's eastern flank experienced a catastrophic collapse on a scale rarely seen in human history. The resulting landslide and tsunami left scars across the Mediterranean seafloor and created the Valle del Bove, a horseshoe-shaped depression 5 by 10 kilometers in size. It serves as a chilling reminder of the volcano's potential for sudden, devastating failure. Today, that same eastern flank continues its slow march toward the Ionian Sea at a rate of 14 millimeters per year. The entire slope is sliding on an unstable foundation of clay and volcanic debris, creating a network of fractures and faults that leave the volcano increasingly vulnerable to external seismic stress. Every earthquake that rattles the Mediterranean basin finds a structural weakness to exploit within Etna's shifting slopes. Recent studies have revealed just how extensive Etna's magmatic plumbing has become. Geophysical surveys show a vast network of interconnected magma reservoirs stretching from 10 kilometers below sea level to just beneath the surface. Like a series of underground pressure cookers, these chambers are all susceptible to the slightest change in seismic stress. A distant earthquake shifting the position of one reservoir can set off a chain reaction throughout the entire system. But Etna does not just passively absorb seismic stress. It can also actively redistribute it. Dr. Ferretto Carlino's research reveals that the volcano's massive weight and constant gravitational shifting create their own local earthquakes and pressure perturbations. Every effusive eruption alters the delicate balance of stress fields across Sicily, sending seismic ripples through the crust that can travel much further than anyone initially realized. The implications are sobering. Etna has grown into a geological linchpin for the entire Mediterranean region. The volcano's shifting mass, extensive magma reservoirs, and structural instability leave it poised to both absorb and amplify the seismic stress of a collision between continents. It is a spiraling feedback loop of geological cause and effect that has left Etna inextricably linked to tectonic activity across the Mediterranean. The alarm bells started ringing in February 2025. After months of relative quiet, Etna suddenly roared back to life with a series of explosive paroxysms from its southeast crater. Towering fountains of lava illuminated the winter sky as volcanic bombs the size of cars crashed down the mountain's flanks. But for scientists monitoring the volcano, the real concern was what they could not see. In the weeks leading up to the February eruptions, a dense network of GPS stations and tiltmeters had detected a subtle but unmistakable pattern of ground deformation spreading across Etna's slopes. The volcano was quite literally inflating, its flanks swelling with magma rising from deep within the earth. Strain meters showed the mountain stretching and contracting like a massive, slow-beating heart. This pattern, known as pre-eruptive tumescence, is a classic precursor to volcanic activity. But what troubled researchers was the sheer scale of the deformation. Satellite radar data revealed that the ground was uplifting by as much as 2 centimeters per day across an area the size of Chicago. Reservoir models suggested that over 30 million cubic meters of magma were being forced into Etna's shallow plumbing system. For Dr. Tanya Shiro of the Etna Volcano Observatory, these were numbers that defied historical precedent. Dr. Shiro said, "In the past, we have seen pockets of localized inflation preceding individual eruptions. But this was different. The entire volcano was responding to some massive input of pressure, and it was affecting areas that had never shown significant deformation before." The source of that pressure soon became clear. On May 14th at 3:24 a.m. local time, a powerful earthquake rattled the Mediterranean seafloor 50 kilometers south of Crete. The magnitude 6.4 tremor struck along a complex transform fault system separating the African and Aegean tectonic plates. It was the strongest quake to hit the region in decades. Seismometers across the Mediterranean immediately lit up with the distinctive high-frequency vibrations of a tectonic snap. But within that seismic cacophony, a different pattern soon emerged. Low-frequency waves, similar to the sound of distant thunder, began rolling through the crust on a direct path towards Sicily. Dr. Elena Russo, a seismologist at the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, was one of the first to recognize the significance of those deep, resonant frequencies. She said these were pressure waves, essentially seismic sound waves traveling through the Earth's crust. They were being generated by the sudden movement of the fault planes, like the vibrations of a giant subterranean guitar string. As those pressure waves raced across the Mediterranean, they began subtly altering the stress fields of every geological feature they encountered. Strain gauges registered sudden spikes in tectonic tension as far away as the Anatolian Fault in Turkey. GPS stations detected minute ground displacements, rippling across entire coastlines. And beneath Etna, those low-frequency waves found a natural resonance with the volcano's magmatic plumbing. Dr. Shiro's monitoring network immediately registered the effects. The deformation readings went off the charts. It was as if the entire volcano was being squeezed like a giant stress ball. Magma reservoirs that had been stable for months suddenly began pressurizing and rupturing their rock walls. Hydrothermal systems flashed into steam. The mountain groaned with the strain of it. For 17 days, Etna shuddered and convulsed as the pressure waves from Crete's earthquake reverberated through its structure. And then, on June 2nd, the volcano finally found its release. A massive eruption blasted from the southeast crater, sending a column of ash and gas towering 15 kilometers into the sky. Pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and rock, came crashing down the mountain's flanks at hurricane speeds. In a single violent paroxysm, Etna had effectively become a pressure relief valve for seismic stress, generated hundreds of kilometers away. The implications were both fascinating and deeply unsettling. If distant earthquakes could have such dramatic effects on Etna's behavior, then the volcano's future eruptions might be less predictable than anyone had previously thought. The fallout from Etna's June 2nd eruption extended far beyond Sicily's shores. As volcanic ash drifted across the Mediterranean, a dense network of seismometers and infrasound detectors began lighting up with peculiar readings. From Spain's Canary Islands to the Greek Peloponnese, sensitive instruments registered low-frequency rumblings and seismic echoes coinciding perfectly with Etna's eruptive thrusts. At first, scientists assumed they were detecting the typical seismic noise of a major volcanic blast, but as the data poured in, a more unsettling pattern emerged. The echoes were not just seismic noise, they were specific vibrational frequencies, and they were being registered at volcanic and tectonic features across the Mediterranean. Dr. Adrienne Sica, a geophysicist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was one of the first to connect the dots. She said they were seeing Etna's eruptive harmonics being replicated at other volcanoes and fault systems hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. It was as if the volcano was transmitting its unique seismic signature across the entire Mediterranean like some kind of geological Wi-Fi. One of the clearest examples came from Mount Vesuvius, the infamous volcano that had destroyed Pompeii nearly 2,000 years ago. Seismometers around the Bay of Naples registered a sudden spike in deep harmonic tremors within hours of Etna's eruption. The frequencies of those tremors lined up perfectly with the low-frequency waves that had emanated from Sicily. For Dr. Luca Teresi, the director of the Vesuvius Observatory, the implications were alarming. He said Vesuvius has been silent since 1944, but studies show it is an incredibly sensitive volcano. It behaves like a seismometer in its own right, picking up the faintest changes in regional stress. To see it suddenly pulsing in synchronicity with Etna was a warning sign that must be taken very seriously. Similar warning signs began appearing at other volcanic centres across the Mediterranean. At Santorini, the picturesque Greek island that was partly destroyed by a massive eruption 3,600 years ago, underwater microphones detected a significant increase in gas bubbles rising from submarine vents. The composition of those gases perfectly matched the chemical signature of Etna's eruptive plume. Even at volcanic systems not typically associated with Mediterranean tectonics, the effects of Etna's eruption were being felt. Seismic stations in Germany's Eifel volcanic field, a region of dormant volcanoes that last erupted 13,000 years ago, registered subtle but unmistakable ground deformations, coinciding with the arrival of low-frequency pressure waves from Sicily. For Dr. Eleonora Rivalta, a volcanologist at the GFZ German Research Center for Geosciences, these distant correlations pointed to a hidden network of geological connectedness that scientists were only beginning to understand. She said it was as if these disparate tectonic features are actually part of a single interconnected system. Seismic stresses and volcanic pressures are not isolated phenomena. They are constantly being transmitted and amplified across huge distances through the Earth's crust. The idea that volcanoes and fault lines could be talking to each other across vast expanses of the Mediterranean was a paradigm shift for many researchers. But the evidence was becoming increasingly hard to ignore. Everywhere scientists looked, they found signs that Etna's eruption had sent out a cascade of geological ripple effects that were continuing to reverberate through the region's tectonic framework. In Turkey, strain gauges along the North Anatolian Fault registered sudden spikes in tectonic stress, coinciding with the arrival of low-frequency waves from Sicily. GPS stations detected a subtle but widespread pattern of ground deformation stretching from Istanbul to Ankara. It was as if the entire fault system was being gently squeezed by an invisible hand. Dr. Hakan Karadeniz, a seismologist at the Kandilli Observatory and Earthquake Research Institute, saw eerie parallels with the region's past megaquakes. He said the North Anatolian Fault is one of the most seismically active structures on Earth. It is like a loaded spring, constantly being compressed by the collision of the Arabian and Eurasian plates. To see it suddenly responding to volcanic eruptions in Italy tells us that the connections between these systems are far more profound than we ever realized. As the summer of 2025 progressed, the signs of a Mediterranean-wide geological chain reaction became impossible to ignore. From the shores of the Levantine Sea to the coasts of North Africa, a patchwork of seismic and volcanic features that had long been considered isolated began pulsing with coordinated activity. It was as if the Earth itself was ringing like a vast planetary bell. For scientists, the implications were both fascinating and deeply troubling. If volcanic eruptions in one corner of the Mediterranean could trigger earthquakes and magmatic unrest hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, then the potential for a regional scale geological catastrophe was far greater than anyone had previously imagined. Dr. Alessandro Amato, a senior seismologist at Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, put it bluntly. He said we are looking at a tectonic time bomb. The Mediterranean is a geological pressure cooker, and the events of the past few months have shown how interconnected and unstable the whole system really is. One of the most unsettling revelations came from the island of Ischia, a popular tourist destination just off the coast of Naples. In July 2025, a swarm of small earthquakes began rattling the island, causing widespread panic and evacuations. What really caught the attention of scientists was the timing of those tremors. The quakes on Ischia started exactly 36 days after Etna's eruption, explained Dr. Federica Lanza, a volcanologist at the University of Naples Federico II. That is the same amount of time it took for low-frequency pressure waves to travel from Sicily to Ischia's magmatic system. Scientists say we are seeing a direct cause and effect relationship between volcanic activity in one location and seismic unrest in another. Similar cause and effect. Relationships began emerging at other geological hotspots across the Mediterranean. In Greece, a sudden uptick in seismic activity along the Hellenic Trench, a massive subduction zone where the African plate is diving beneath the Aegean, coincided with the arrival of pressure waves from Etna. The island of Crete, still reeling from the May 14th earthquake, experienced a fresh swarm of tremors that registered on seismometers as far away as Athens. Even more concerning were the signs of unrest at some of the Mediterranean's most iconic volcanic landmarks. At Mount Stromboli, known as the Lighthouse of the Mediterranean, which has been erupting almost continuously for over a millennium, seismic stations detected a sudden change in the volcano's eruptive rhythm. The timing of that change lined up perfectly with the arrival of low-frequency waves from Sicily. Dr. Luca Caricchi, a volcanologist at the University of Geneva, saw disturbing parallels with past volcanic catastrophes. He noted that Stromboli is a very reliable volcano. It typically erupts every 10 to 20 minutes, like clockwork. To see it suddenly changing its behaviour in response to seismic events hundreds of kilometres away is a red flag. It is similar to what scientists observed before the catastrophic flank collapse of Mount St. Helens in 1980. But perhaps the most unsettling evidence of a Mediterranean-wide geological chain reaction came from a place that had long been considered dormant. In September 2025, a swarm of small earthquakes began shaking the French region of Auvergne, home to a sprawling volcanic field that had not erupted in over 6,000 years. The tremors were centered around the Puy de Dôme, a towering lava dome that looms over the city of Clermont-Ferrand. At first, local authorities dismissed the quakes as a fluke, a brief seismic hiccup in a region that had long been considered geologically stable. But as the tremors continued to intensify, a team of scientists from the French National Centre for Scientific Research, CNRS, began to investigate. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the geological community. Dr. Etienne Deloul, a geochemist at CNRS, said they analysed gas samples from the Puy de Dôme and found traces of the same chemical signature that was present in Etna's eruptive plume. He called it a smoking gun, proof that the volcanic systems of the Mediterranean are far more interconnected than we ever realised. The implications were nothing short of terrifying. If seismic activity in Italy could trigger volcanic unrest in France, then the potential for a cascading geological catastrophe was virtually unlimited. The entire Mediterranean basin, home to over 480 million people, and some of the world's most iconic cultural landmarks, was revealed to be sitting atop a powder keg of interconnected tectonic and volcanic systems. Dr. Hakan Karadeniz, the Turkish seismologist who had been monitoring the North Anatolian fault, put the stakes in stark perspective. He said they were no longer talking about individual disasters. They were talking about the possibility of a regional-scale geological catastrophe, a chain reaction of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis that could devastate the entire Mediterranean basin. As the autumn of 2025 faded into winter, the signs of a looming geological catastrophe became impossible to ignore. From the shores of the Aegean to the coasts of North Africa, a network of seismic and volcanic features that had once been considered isolated began pulsing with increasingly coordinated activity. It was as if the Mediterranean basin itself was awakening from a long geological slumber. At the heart of that awakening was Mount Etna, the Sicilian volcano, which had been erupting almost continuously since the June 2nd paroxysm, began to show signs of even greater unrest. Satellite radar imagery revealed a pattern of ground deformation that dwarfed anything scientists had seen in the volcano's recent history. The eastern flank, already sliding towards the Ionian Sea at a rate of 14 millimeters per year, suddenly surged forward by over 1 meter in a matter of days. Dr. Carlo Doglioni, the president of Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, said Etna is the key to understanding what is happening across the Mediterranean. He said it is like a geological amplifier, a nexus point where the seismic and volcanic energies of the entire region converge and intensify. The convergence of those forces became clear in the early hours of December 28th. At 2:37 a.m. local time, a powerful earthquake struck the Mediterranean seafloor just north of Sicily. A magnitude 7.1 tremor, centered along a previously unknown fault line, sent shockwaves racing through the Earth's crust at speeds approaching 8,000 meters per second. Within minutes, those shockwaves had reached Etna. The volcano, already teetering on the brink of catastrophic instability, suddenly exploded with a force that dwarfed anything in its recorded history. A massive plume of ash and gas, laced with incandescent volcanic bombs, shot 30 kilometers into the sky. Pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and rock, came crashing down the mountain's flanks at speeds of over 700 kilometers per hour. The eruption's scale defied belief. Seismometers as far away as Rome and Athens registered the blast as a magnitude 5.8 earthquake in its own right. Ash from the eruption drifted on the winds as far as the Middle East and North Africa, grounding flights and triggering widespread respiratory emergencies. But the worst was yet to come. As the eruption reached its climax, a massive chunk of Etna's eastern flank suddenly gave way. 100 cubic kilometers of rock and debris, weakened by decades of gravitational instability and seismic stress. Awakens broke free from the mountain and began tumbling towards the Ionian Sea. The resulting landslide, the largest in recorded history, sent a tsunami racing across the Mediterranean at speeds of over 800 kilometers per hour. The devastation was almost unimaginable. Coastal communities in Sicily and Calabria were wiped off the map in a matter of minutes. The city of Catania, home to over 300,000 people, was virtually obliterated by waves that reached up to 30 meters in height. As the tsunami raced across the Mediterranean, it began triggering a cascade of secondary disasters. In Greece, the waves slammed into the Peloponnese with such force that they triggered a massive earthquake along the Hellenic Trench. A magnitude 8.2 tremor, the strongest to hit the region in over a century, sent its own shockwaves racing through the Earth's crust. Those shockwaves in turn triggered a chain reaction of volcanic eruptions that stretched from the Aegean to Anatolia. The island of Santorini, the site of one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history, suddenly exploded with a force that rivaled the Minoan eruption of 3,600 years ago. The nearby island of Nissos, home to a massive caldera that had been dormant for over 150,000 years, suddenly came back to life with a VEI-6 eruption that sent ash and pumice raining down on the eastern Mediterranean. In Turkey, the shockwaves from the Hellenic Trench earthquake triggered a massive rupture along the North Anatolian fault. The resulting magnitude, 7.6 tremor, centered just outside the city of Istanbul, caused widespread destruction and set off a chain reaction of landslides and tsunamis that devastated the coast of the Black Sea. But perhaps the most terrifying consequence of the Mediterranean's geological awakening came from a place that few had ever considered a threat. On January 15, 2026, a swarm of massive earthquakes began shaking the French region of Auvergne. The tremors, which reached magnitudes of up to 6.8, were centered around the Puy de Dôme, the towering lava dome that had been dormant for over 6,000 years. As the quakes intensified, a team of scientists from the French National Centre for Scientific Research made a horrifying discovery. The Puy de Dôme, long considered extinct, was actually a fully functional magma chamber. The centuries of seismic and volcanic activity that had been ravaging the Mediterranean had finally provided the crucial nudge the volcano needed to reawaken. On January 28, 2026, the Puy de Dôme exploded with a force that dwarfed anything in the region's geological history. A VEI-7 eruption sent a massive plume of ash and gas soaring 40 kilometers into the stratosphere. Pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and rock came crashing down the mountain's flanks at speeds of over 1,000 kilometers per hour, incinerating everything in their path. The devastation was almost unimaginable. The city of Clermont-Ferrand, home to over 140,000 people, was buried under meters of ash and debris. The surrounding countryside was transformed into a smoking wasteland, with thousands of hectares of farmland and forest destroyed in a matter of hours. But the worst was yet to come. As the ash from the Puy de Dôme eruption began to drift on the winds, it triggered a cascade of secondary disasters that stretched across the entire European continent. The ash cloud, laced with sulfur dioxide and other toxic gases, caused widespread crop failures and triggered a massive spike in respiratory illnesses. The sheer volume of ash in the atmosphere began to block out the sun, triggering a volcanic winter. Within weeks, temperatures across Europe began to plummet. The summer of 2026 became the coldest on record, with widespread frosts and snowstorms causing massive damage to infrastructure and agriculture. The economic toll was staggering, with entire industries grinding to a halt as supply chains collapsed and transportation networks seized up. But even as Europe struggled to cope with the fallout from the Puy de Dôme eruption, the Mediterranean's geological awakening showed no signs of slowing down. The seismic and volcanic activity that had been ravaging the region for months continued to intensify, with new earthquakes and eruptions being reported on a daily basis. It was as if the Earth itself was unleashing a geological reckoning, a devastating reminder of the incredible power and interconnectedness of the planet's tectonic systems. And at the heart of that reckoning was the Mediterranean, a region that had long been considered a cradle of human civilization, but was now revealed to be sitting atop a network of geological time bombs. As the world watched in horror, one thing became clear: the Mediterranean's seismic secret was out, and the consequences would be felt for generations to come. The only question that remained was whether humanity would be able to adapt and survive in the face of a geological catastrophe unlike anything in recorded history. Make sure to stay tuned to Earth Attacks for all the latest updates on this unprecedented geological crisis. We'll be bringing you live coverage of eruptions, earthquakes and tsunamis, plus expert analysis from some of the world's leading geologists and volcanologists. The future of the Mediterranean and the world may hang in the balance.